Hi, this is Patrick Henry, the CEO of Quest Fusion with the Real Deal What Matters. I'm here today with Jeremy Glaser from Mintz Levin, the law firm. Jeremy serves as the co-chair of the firm's venture capital and emerging companies practice. He works with both venture capitalists as well as with entrepreneurs, so he brings a unique set of experience there. We've had Jeremy as a guest on the show before, and love talking with him and getting his insight on legal issues. Jeremy has tons of awards and recognitions, and he was most recently named the San Diego Venture Capital Law Lawyer of the Year. Congratulations on that, Jeremy.
Thank you.
And he is a past president and board member for the San Diego Venture Group and is a member of the American Bar Association. So today we're going to talk about corporate structures available for startups. And as you're starting a company, what are the things you need to consider, pros and cons of various different types of corporate structures. And Jeremy is an expert on this and many other things. So why don't we start with, why don't you describe in layman's terms the available corporate structures for startups and the things you need to think about, in terms of where the company's ultimately going to go and pros and cons of starting a particular place if you have to change, or what exactly should you do?
Sure. So there's really three types of structures, right? And well, really four, but there's one we won't even really talk about because we don't use it really often for startups and technology companies, and that's partnership. So we'll put that one aside.
Okay.
But really, the three structures are sole proprietorship,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't even have a structure at all. You're just starting your own business.
Yeah.
We can put that one aside pretty quickly for the simple reason that you don't really want to do business as a sole proprietor if you're an entrepreneur trying to build a company to ultimately raise money from investors, because nobody's going to want to invest in a business that has potentially unlimited liability.
Yeah.
And in fact, even if you're starting, a bicycle shop, I would tell you probably don't want to be a sole proprietorship. You want to use some sort of an entity. So we'll put that one aside too.
Okay. So
really
when
focus-
does it make sense to be a sole proprietor and then just to get a DBA, doing business as, if you're...
As an attorney, I would say never.
Okay.
It's so inexpensive these days to form an entity and at least get the protection of limited liability of
Okay.
having a corporation or a limited liability company. I can't picture any situation in today's world with the litigious society we live in that you would want to expose yourself as a sole proprietor.
Okay.
So I think we get rid of those two outliers and we really focus in on a corporation or a limited liability company.
Okay.
That's where everybody really goes to form their companies.
Okay.
So let's talk about limited liability companies briefly, just because they're newer than the corporations and a little more
So
complicated.
it's an LLC.
Yeah, so an LLC, exactly. LLCs are relatively new, but they're really fabulous structures. The primary reason that they're fabulous is they give you the benefit of limited liability combined with what we call flow-through taxation. So what does that mean? What that means is you don't have to pay taxes on the earnings of that entity. Instead, what happens is if the company has earnings or losses, those earnings and losses flow through the entity is ignored, and you as the entrepreneur or your investors get to take those losses or those profits onto your own personal income taxes.
Okay.
That can be very beneficial because you're avoiding what we call the double taxation, which can happen in the corporate structure.
Okay.
So, great advantage of LLCs. Another great advantage of LLCs as compared to, there's a type of a corporation that could also give you that pass-through treatment, which is called an S Corp, which we can talk about a little more in a moment.
Yeah.
But the beauty of an LLC is incredibly flexible. LLCs, you can literally structure them any way you want. You can create a board of directors or not. You can have what are called preferential returns for different owners, or you can have everybody have the same ownership level. You can have officers or not have officers. You can literally draft them for any sort of structure, relationship that you want among your investors. So I'm a real big fan of LLCs for most companies. And I'll tell you, I've become a bigger fan of them in the context of even the technology world and startup companies recently, because it's now very easy to convert. You talked about changing entities. It's become very easy now to convert from a Delaware limited liability company, so a limited liability company formed in the state of Delaware, into a corporation. And why would you do that? Well, the reason is venture capitalists prefer to invest in the corporate structure. They've become accustomed to preferred stock, and they understand what a Delaware corporation is, and all the law around Delaware corporations. So why do I start people with an LLC and then do that conversion now? The real reason is that the LLC gives you the benefit of that flow through of losses, and as we all know, startup companies usually have losses in the early years. And so rather than having those losses locked up in the corporation where they may or may not really be useful, you get to have those losses go to the benefit of your investors, which can be viewed as a real benefit for the early stage investors. So you operate as an LLC until you bring in the institutional financing, at which point, with a very simple filing, you then convert to a corporation. So really that's what I'm seeing a lot more of, and in fact, I've really only in the last year been really advising companies now, start as an LLC, do that conversion when it comes time for the institutional investment. So let's circle back to the more traditional corporation. Corporations are obviously the preferred form for any company that's going to take institutional money. And again, provides limited liability, has very clear rules and regulations and court opinions about boards, fiduciary duties, and officers and structures. So they're just really well, established and simple to put in place. So, corporations are fabulous structures, and in fact required if you're going to go down with the venture capital route.
And you got S corps and C corps. Is that the only two varieties, or are there other things out there?
Well, there are other varieties, I should say. Varietals.
Jeremy is opening a wine store.
I was thinking about wine.
So he's thinking about varietals.
Exactly. But the two that really matter most for people who are doing a for-profit business are the C corp and the S corp. And that's basically a tax election. I think one of the things people get confused about is they think somehow they're different corporations. They're not. It's a tax election. You elect to be an S corp. If you don't make that election, you're going to be taxed as a C corp. A C corp is one where the earnings stay in the business. If you have profits in the company, you're going to pay taxes at the corporate level. So if you try to distribute the money out, you're creating this double taxation issue. Which is probably okay for a lot of technology companies because, as you know, there's not a lot of startup companies that are paying dividends. They're building up the value in the business, and the goal is to go public or to sell the business. And a C corp is a perfectly good structure for that, and in fact, the preferred structure ultimately for that entity. The S corp is, again, what we used to do is start companies as S corps. So again, the benefit of the losses would flow through to the early investors. And then again, once the institutional investor came in, the S corp would basically be invalidated just by law because you can't have an entity stockholder in an S corp. So it would automatically convert to a C corp at that point. But the reality is S corps have a lot of limitations, a lot of restrictions on the nature of the investors, on the different classes and rights of ownership that you can put in place. So I really don't use S corps anymore. I really almost always use LLCs. And then I think an important point for people to really be aware of, particularly here in California, is the advantages of being in Delaware. A lot of times I have entrepreneurs show up at my door and they formed a California corporation or a California LLC using an unnamed company that they can do online and is very inexpensive. And I got to tell you, I think that's actually a mistake. What I tell companies when they walk in the door is, if you're going to have a bicycle shop is always the example I use, or a bakery, fine. California corporation, California LLC, it's fine. But if you're going to be taking outside money, you want to have the clarity of the Delaware law around the rights and responsibilities of you as a director, as you as a majority stockholder, of your officers. And so I urge people to not form entities in California, but to go to Delaware. And in fact, just as a more simple basis, Delaware is a really high service state. What do I mean by that? When you're doing a financing, as you know, having done so many financings, time is of the essence. And so if you want to close your financing, you want to know that you can send in your amendment of your certificate that's creating your preferred stock and get it back instantly so you can close your financing. Well, Delaware is set up to do that. Very high service. California is not.
Yeah.
You could sometimes have very significant delays that could delay your closing, which is never a good idea.
Right.
So, bottom line, when you're forming a company, my advice is start as a Delaware limited liability company, assuming that you see value of getting the losses onto your investors' individual financials,
Right.
taxes, and knowing that you'll convert, which is very simple now in Delaware, into a corporation when you're going to get institutional investors.
Okay, awesome. Well, this was great. Very informational as always. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate your insight on this.
My pleasure. Thank you, Patrick.
This is Patrick Henry, the CEO of Quest Fusion with The Real Deal, What Matters.